Howdy, everyone. Christine here with the Texas Blockcast, and we are going to be talking today about Bitcoin NFT, the Lightning Network, and ordinals. We're here with Pierre Rochard, Vice President of Research at Riot Platforms. Pierre, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thanks for having me, Christine. Excited to talk all things Bitcoin.
For many of our listeners, I'm sure they're very familiar with you. Your handle, Bitcoin Pierre, right? You're mostly known for that, but you've been in this space for quite a long time, correct? So you were in accounting originally, and now you're doing mining. Tell us a little bit about your history, Pierre.
Yeah, sure. So I really took a deep dive into Bitcoin my last year of graduate school at UT Austin. I was getting my master's in accounting there. Um, and so this is end of 2012, early 2013. Really got immediately interested in it because of all the sorts of different threads to pull on. One is that I had always been interested in open source software. So I listened to a gentleman named Richard Stallman. He would talk about the philosophy of free software and how users should have the right to modify the software that they use. And I thought that was really compelling. And then the other thread was the monetary aspect of it. I really got interested in accounting because I was interested in financial economics and monetary economics and all of the accounting implications of it. So to me, Bitcoin is like the first open source accounting software where you use cryptography and you have scarcity. So I found that to be fascinating and immediately started writing about it and going down the rabbit hole. Eventually, that led me to learn how to write software. So because I wanted to create Bitcoin accounting software, I learned Python, SQL, transitioned my career from accounting into software development. And then most recently, I was a product manager at Kraken for Bitcoin and Lightning. And last year, I joined the Riot team here as the VP of Research.
Wow. So did you get into accounting because of Bitcoin, or did you encounter Bitcoin and it just absolutely upend your life and change everything?
I got into accounting when I was a senior in high school. So this is like 2006, 2007. Maybe while Satoshi was writing the Bitcoin software low key. Definitely was influenced by a lot of economists who would talk about the importance of accounting for the profit and loss system for entrepreneurs to understand how to allocate resources. So that's what drove my interest into accounting, and of course how the banking system works as well. Those were all topics I was interested in before Bitcoin existed, and long before I ever heard about Bitcoin. But my interest in accounting is really what led me to learning about Bitcoin. So I'm grateful for that.
And are you still in touch with those old contacts? Are you teaching people in the financial industry about what you've learned, or is it siloed from your new life?
I did make a good faith effort to orange pill folks at my first job at Deloitte. And that did not really lead to anything at Deloitte. They were really interested in the underlying blockchain technology, but not interested in the currency or accounting ledger aspect of it.
Isn't that interesting? We hear that so much. People are so fascinated by blockchain, and they sometimes miss the real innovation of Bitcoin, which is not necessarily blockchain technology, but it's the decentralization, it's the solving of the Byzantine generals problem. I don't know if you have something to comment on that, but the difference between Bitcoin and blockchain, and where you, if you could be before them today, what might you say to them on that topic?
I mean, other than saying "I told you so," I think that I would say that that it's going to continue to be the case that the blockchain technology aspect of it, it's important, right? This idea of having cryptographic verification of the ledger entries, but it has to be complemented by the incentives.
Yes.
That ultimately it's about game theory and incentives. And a key part of that is the mining piece of the puzzle, where if we read Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper, it's really not about blockchain technology. His white paper is about proof of work and the difficulty adjustment and how we can have a ledger that has a decentralized timestamping component to it so that we solve the double spending problem. And ultimately, that is what Satoshi's innovation was. And that's where I think all of the value is created.
Yes. And so you have actually come quite a way. You did the accounting in that world, and then you were doing the programming. I know that you were very involved in Lightning at the very beginning. Is that correct?
Not at the very beginning. At the very beginning, I was actually a Lightning skeptic. So
Really?
the white paper came out in 2014. I was working at BitPay in Atlanta, which is a Bitcoin payment processing company. And when I read the white paper, I thought to myself, this Lightning thing is way too complicated for it to work. And so I kind of just put it on the shelf. But they continued developing on it, much to their credit, the Lightning developers. And in 2018, they launched on mainnet, and that's when I started hearing some hype about it, some buzz. In particular, Jack Mallers and the Chain Code Labs team that does research around the Bitcoin protocol and makes contributions to Bitcoin Core. They announced that they were doing a Lightning residency, which is like a 1 week intensive program for developers to familiarize themselves with Lightning. So I took those two things as signals that maybe I was wrong about Lightning and that I needed to dig into it. So to apply for the residency program, I started reading the protocol specifications for Lightning called bolts. And, Lightning did strike. It hit me that this actually, even though it was complicated under the hood, it was understandable, and that it would be possible to build programming interfaces and wallet interfaces to hide all the complexity from the users and really deliver a product that would solve two of the key criticisms of Bitcoin. One, that it's too slow, that you have to wait 10 plus minutes for a transaction, which doesn't really work when you're buying your coffee. You'll get cold coffee, as a representative recently was on the record as saying. And two, that the transaction fees can be very volatile on chain. So we saw in 2017 transaction fees went up to $30, and then they went down to pennies. So that volatility of transaction fees really creates a UX challenge on chain. So Lightning solves those two issues. It's instant. It has very low fees. So once I understood that, it became a no-brainer that there would be a lot of demand for using Lightning. And my project for the residency was to create an Excel plugin. So I definitely had not shaken off the accountant hat of being an Excel. And business users mostly are, on Windows in Excel, interacting with spreadsheets. So I created an Excel plugin that lets you communicate with your Lightning node. And then the challenge I found was that it's hard to set up a Lightning node on Windows. You have to go into the command line. And most business users never go into PowerShell and put in commands or, modify configuration files.
Never done it.
And I don't like doing it personally either, even though I've learned how to develop software. I like to avoid the command line.
Yeah.
So I created a graphical user interface for launching Lightning nodes. So it is called the Node Launcher. It's still available if folks want to try it out. It allows you to have a Lightning node on Windows, on Mac OS, on Linux, without having to go in the command line. That was my favorite project, and that led me to joining Kraken and helping them integrate with the Lightning Network there.
Wow. You know, it makes me think of the situation that El Salvador is seeing with the capacity to use Bitcoin for legal tender. And I'm not sure that that would have been possible without developers like yourself building out the Lightning Network. Would you agree? Because the transaction fees, it's just prohibitive. If you want to buy a cup of coffee, as you say, and spend a couple dollars on it, Lightning really did enable those inroads to being able to use it more as a currency.
Yep, that's correct. And I think that Bitcoin would have succeeded just on its merits as a store of value, as kind of a
Yes.
large value settlement network. But if we want Bitcoin to really fulfill its whole promise of being peer-to-peer electronic cash, you have to build additional layers on top of it. And I think that Lightning has really proven itself as a robust layer for payments.
So you said that that was your favorite project, but it sounds like you've had many projects. But you've moved now. Do you miss that part of development? Are you still doing software development, or have you gone full into mining?
So I still do software development, and it's really my most recent software development efforts have been around how do I get the right data at my fingertips to help on the research and education piece of it, because there's a tremendous amount of, I would call them narratives that float around, right? People have sound bites, ways of thinking about Bitcoin,
Yeah.
both positively and negatively, that are either understated relative to the data or overstated relative to the data. And so I think that by introducing more data into the conversation, we can, one, have more persuasive talking points because we can have actual figures behind them. And two, avoid talking points that are not substantiated by the data. So my focus has been software development, really along the data analytics part of Bitcoin, and generating charts for that. Now, I do think that eventually I'll have enough done there that I can start experimenting with other software projects as well on my to-do list, but that's currently where I'm at.
One of the things that I noticed about your title is of research. So I was curious if that was part of the research that you're doing with Riot right now.
Yeah, so last year we released a research report with Blockware, Joe Burnett there, where we looked at transaction fees for Bitcoin, and what their purpose is, how they get paid, and the historical trends around them. Because there's a lot of, again, narratives around transaction fees, and we wanted to demystify them. So that was our research report last year. Lately, I've been looking at really the utilization rate of Bitcoin block space and the market around block space. So gets into the conversation of ordinals and inscriptions.
Yes.
But that's kind of the research piece of my role.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was one of the many reasons I wanted to talk to you today. Someone was saying you're probably one of the only people in the whole Bitcoin space that can really understand the whole ordinal debate. But on Twitter right now, it's a fire as people are debating this whole new thing of being able to put NFTs on the Bitcoin blockchain. And one of the things I so respect about you, Pierre, is you have such a capacity to break things down in a simple manner and articulate both sides of the discussion. So I'd love to hear your take on the great ordinal debate, starting with helping our listeners understand what is going on here, what is this all about, and what are the implications for the Bitcoin network?
Yeah, so I think that we'd have to start with describing what ordinals are. the ordinal numbering system that Casey Rodarmer came up with, and he's the inventor of this, is a way of essentially taking the Bitcoin ledger and layering on top of it a map, a map where we are essentially mapping serial numbers or unique identifiers to each Satoshi. Now, the reason we have to do this is because on the actual Bitcoin ledger, there is no such mapping. There's Satoshis are actually fungible, and there's lots of debate about what that word means, fungibility. But basically, the idea being that when you are unlocking Satoshis with a Bitcoin transaction and then locking them back up, there's no identity that is carried forth from the unlocking to the locking back up. They get put into a common pool,
Right.
and there's no way of having serial numbers at the base layer.
Mm-hmm.
So Casey's created a layer on top of Bitcoin that references the Bitcoin ledger, but is not necessarily enforced by the Bitcoin ledger. So the metaphor I use, and I use it without prejudice, because when people hear this metaphor, they think I'm casting aspersions on ordinals, but I'm really not, is that you could think of the Bitcoin ledger as astronomy and looking at the data there, and that ordinals are like astrology, where we're mapping on meaning on top of
Mm-hmm.
something that's objective, right?
Right.
And
There's 21 million Satoshis, but on top of that, there's new layers of meaning that are being added on to each of those sats. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay.
So there's 2.1 quadrillion
Right. Total
Satoshis.
Satoshis.
Yeah. 21 million Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is divisible into 100 million
100 million
Satoshis.
Satoshis. That's right.
Yeah. The units are, we're still wrapping our heads around all the different units in Bitcoin, but now we've got more to learn about with ordinals. So, yeah, so that is basically what ordinals are. And I think that it's fairly innocuous and kind of just a harmless hobby that Casey has discovered. What I want to highlight is that in terms of the methodology for how to apply a map of meaning to the ledger, there's an infinite number of different ways one could go about doing it. Casey's ordinals approach is really the simplest way to do it, and I think that's why it has so rapidly gained mindshare. Is that it's a compelling way to do it. It's not like he's are adding unnecessary complexity to it or anything like that, which some have accused past schemes like this of being too complex. And so ordinals is just kind of making it as simple as possible. And so that perhaps makes it the most competitive to gain mindshare. So that's ordinals. The inscriptions aspect of it is then saying, okay, well, we are able to put data into the blockchain, and we can assign that data to specific ordinals, again, on this layer on top of Bitcoin. Now, the data is still on layer one, just like the Satoshis are on layer one, but the mapping of the Satoshis to the data, that is the ordinals to the inscriptions, is done on an adjacent layer. I'm not even going to call it a layer on top of Bitcoin, because it's not. I think one of the traps we get into is equating it with Lightning.
Right. As a layer 2 solution.
Yeah.
But this is something that, just to make sure that I'm understanding correctly, there's the 100 million Satoshis per Bitcoin, and then the inputs is associated with a particular Satoshi in a particular Bitcoin, so that theoretically, is there only one per Satoshi that can be coded in?
No. So because this is done virtually through the ordinals client, the ordinals client could assign multiple inscriptions to one ordinal. even though if we look at it on the Bitcoin ledger, we wouldn't even know about ordinals or inscriptions.
Right.
And so that's, I think, where it's another metaphor for ordinals is and this is the metaphor that Casey uses, because I think it's less prejudicial than astrology, is putting on glasses, right? Putting on
Right.
green colored glasses, rose colored glasses, whatever you'd like, a lens through which to look at the blockchain that is different than how it looks in its raw format without any kind of filter.
Yes.
And so this filter is not part of the Bitcoin consensus rules. It's a filter that people voluntarily decide to look at the ledger through and to start assigning data or value to specific properties. They're only visible through the filter.
So, but taking a step back, looking at it from a more broad perspective, what is the how do I say that? But taking a step back, there's what this is allowing now is to basically write code onto the base layer of Bitcoin, right? And so to be able to put NFTs or other tokenized projects on the first layer. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I think what's really captivating about this is that it allows us to write the code onto the base layer, but then the base layer does not execute the code.
Okay.
The base layer actually ignores the code, and it's only the ordinals client that is reading the code from the base layer and then executing it, either to render a JPEG image, or folks have had PDFs, JavaScript applications, video games.
Wow.
So by moving all of the execution off chain, then it allows for a lot more flexibility than what people have been doing with on-chain code execution on other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, where they are trying to have Ethereum be the world computer where all the computation is executed on chain. Whereas what ordinals are doing is saying, let's use on chain just for data storage and retrieval.
Right.
And then actually processing that data and making it useful. We'll do all of that off chain.
So is there a capacity in Bitcoin to replace what a lot of the other smart contract platforms are doing, like an Ethereum or a Tron?
It's really case by case. And I think that because of Casey's imagination, he's really unlocked Pandora's box here, where really you could build any kind of application. What I think the proponents of Ethereum would come back to is that, in their view, the execution should be on chain. So they don't like that Ordinals does things off chain. To them, they kind of have an ethos that's not. I don't even know how to describe it really. I mean, I would call it a dogma, or they have a view that in order for it to be properly decentralized, it has to happen on chain, which is really paradoxical because right now Ethereum is scaling using layer 2 solutions like Arbitrum,
Right.
and it's essentially doing the same thing that ordinals are doing, which is put all of the data on chain and then have all of the verification and computation and execution of the code happen off chain. So yeah.
Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Oh, well, I just see it as Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other cryptocurrencies are converging on the same solution from opposite starting points. Right. So it's a fascinating development happening.
Wow. Well, and, people talk a lot about the blockchain as the solution for everything. We talked about that at the beginning, but it is a question. So with the computational power happening on the first layer, is decentralized network really the best solution for that, right? Because we looked at the gas fees earlier, and there's a lot of stuff going on. So with Bitcoin, it's basically just the digital ledger that is being downloaded on each of those nodes. But with Ethereum, you've got all the code that's written on top of it. So it's an interesting question of, do you need a decentralized blockchain to be doing all that stuff, or is the second layer much more appropriate for that kind of thing anyway?
Yeah, so I think it's really on a case-by-case basis. In terms of what folks would refer to as data availability, if you want the data to be available to the most nodes and essentially to be the most replicated, in order to power some kind of decentralized application, then it has to go on chain on the first layer. But it's not necessarily the case that, for example, now on Bitcoin, if we look at where the data of these ordinal inscriptions, these NFTs, JPEGs, but really it can be any kind of data, video games. They've even got 3D CAD files on there now.
Wow.
So for all of this data, it's going into what is called in Bitcoin the witness data. And the witness data is data that is semi-optional for nodes to verify. Meaning that today, if you go download the node software for Bitcoin Core, and you run it, it actually runs with a parameter called assume valid. And this parameter essentially says that for any transactions past a certain height, so that are older than a certain height, the node software will not actually verify that transaction's inputs are actually spending the outputs that they say they are. So it won't actually execute the smart contracts that are old. And the logic here is that because those contracts have been verified over and over already, because they're old,
right,
and they are buried behind so much proof of work, there's no way that they would ever be reversed, and there's no way that they are invalid. So their validity is just assumed, and we ignore them.
Right.
So that means that it's really optional whether to download this witness data that has all of these ordinal inscriptions and all of this data inside of it. And so what folks have been theorizing is that only people who are collecting this data for whatever hobby they have, right, of putting JPEGs on the blockchain, only those folks are going to run Bitcoin nodes that actually process all of the data. Anyone else is going to run a node that has assumed valid on, and discards that data. So there's more software development to be done there.
Yes.
But it's a totally plausible way of scaling Bitcoin, where for the people who care about the data, they can have access to it. For everyone else, they can just delete it, and it's not really a big resource hog.
Interesting. So we know that this can be done. Let's talk a little bit about should it be done. What are your thoughts about the implications of this, and if it's a good development or a troublesome one?
Yeah, so I always start from the point of view, and I recently saw David Marcus, who's working on a Lightning startup, speak to this view that let's focus on solving real world problems. And the thing is, though, is that is subjective. I'll be the first to admit.
Right.
Personally, I don't have a real world problem of needing to put JPEGs on the blockchain. That's not something that I've encountered.
You don't need Bitcoin to be an art gallery.
No, I like going to actual art galleries. I enjoy physical art. I don't really enjoy digital art, to be honest.
Yes.
But I will concede that that is a subjective preference of mine. Um, it's funny when my wife and I were in Paris, we went to the Louvre Museum,
Mm-hmm.
and we were walking around there, and it was crowded with people who were trying to take pictures of every painting. And
To
they
make them
weren't
digital.
actually, yeah, they weren't actually looking at the painting.
Yes.
They were looking at their camera, looking at the painting. And I just found it bizarre. And it honestly, I was getting angry because there are so many, there's really high quality digital prints of all of these paintings that
Yes.
have been done by professionals.
That you don't
And
need to
so
come to
you're,
Paris to see.
no, you can download a high res image of it already, and it's going to be better than your picture of it.
Right.
And so why not just enjoy the physical painting that's in front of you with your own eyes and do that? But obviously I was in the minority there because it felt like 80% of the people there were just taking pictures of these paintings. And
That's funny. So there is the concern of cluttering up the blockchain with monkey JPEGs, but there are other use cases for NFTs, non-fungible tokens, like, I don't know, putting the title of your car on the blockchain and the history of the damage to it, or supply chain, or that kind of thing. Would Bitcoin be a possible avenue for you doing those kind of NFTs as well? The tokenization of assets?
yes, so the challenge I see there is what's called the Oracle problem, which is what real world authority is the one that is declaring, for example, the damage on your car, right? That there has to be somebody who is making an assessment of that. And, for example, Carfax or some kind of auditor or appraiser, and that ultimately they are the ones signing for this. And why would they not store the data on their website instead of a blockchain would kind of be the natural question, because
Right.
ultimately if they are cheating, then there's no way to know. Even if you put it on the blockchain, it doesn't change the fact that they are lying or being duplicitous or something like that.
Yes.
And so that's one question, is the Oracle thing. The counter argument is to have what's called a multi-signature Oracle, essentially have multiple people attesting to this fact, and that you can do that cryptographically. And then we're just getting into a question of cost versus benefit, and is there really an issue of car titles being in a centralized database versus not? I don't know. I think that I think people working on startups around this should experiment with different technologies, but ultimately, it's not really something I'm particularly interested in on a personal level.
Right. So whether it's on Bitcoin or a different smart contract platform, it's
Or just a SQL database.
yeah.
And maybe that raises kind of the topic of Nostr, which is
Yes.
in my view a really interesting place between a centralized SQL database and a fully decentralized blockchain, is to have a semi-decentralized system that still leverages cryptography, but does not give what I would call kind of the global consensus assurances of a blockchain like Bitcoin. So Nostr has emerged as, first and foremost, a replacement for Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
But when we look at its software architecture, it could be a replacement for any number of different applications, including car titles or art on the blockchain or anything like that. And so it leverages this public key, private key cryptography primitive that folks have familiarized themselves with because of Bitcoin. And it also has a server architecture where anybody can be a server and anybody can be a client. So whereas with Twitter, there's kind of a monopoly where Twitter has a monopoly on who can run an official Twitter server, and that is Elon Musk. And then they get to choose who can connect to their API and who can actually have a Twitter client. And they try to lock it down to where only the official Twitter application on iOS or Android can connect to the official Twitter server. So Nostr unbundles all of this, allows anyone to compete on any part of the stack, and just really provides a open source protocol akin to Bitcoin. But the difference with Bitcoin is that there's no consensus over what the rules are. So you can actually make modifications to the Nostr protocol on your own and be able to build your own application that leverages Nostr in some way. And so that's why people are starting to see it as kind of a bridge between all sorts of different applications.
Very interesting. You know, Pierre, I could talk to you all day because you have so much experience in so many different fields in this area. While I still have you, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about reserves, proof of reserves. It's a little different topic, but it goes back to your accounting history. And here at the TBC, you know, we're promoting this bill that's currently been put forward by Representative Capriglione, House Bill 1666, about proof of reserves. And I'd love you, again, to bring your education background to touch a little bit on reserves, why this is an interesting question for the blockchain, why it's not as cut and dry as we might think, anything that our listeners might want to know about that concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Proof of reserves is a way of, as its name implies, for exchanges to cryptographically prove that they have a certain amount of Bitcoin or any other crypto asset backing a specific amount of liabilities with regards to its users. Now, the only reason why, well, first I'll start with this, is that traditionally, auditing has relied on auditors. As we famously saw in the case of Arthur Andersen and Enron, an audit is only as good as its auditor. And so that's why the accounting profession, the auditing profession, is highly regulated by the PCAOB for public company accounting, by the FASB, and then the state kind of CPA regulations. So the audits historically have evolved out of a world of pen and paper. And it's kind of the auditing profession today is skeuomorphic with its history. And what I mean by that is that it carried over all of the concepts from the pen and paper age into the digital age without really modifying the methodology very much. So auditors still talk about work papers, and they still operate in this world of PDFs and, you know, leaving initials on things that are without leveraging all this new technology that's available with cryptography. And so I think that what is really interesting about proof of reserves is that it is pointing to how the auditing world and auditing standards have failed to upgrade to what is possible with public key, private key cryptography and providing cryptographic assurances, even in what, you know, we might call the fiat world, right? Yes. So even when I was doing audits at the beginning of my career, we would literally write up letters and print them out and mail them to counterparties, asking them to confirm liabilities, to confirm bank balances. And that is just something that is so archaic that it's really unnecessary today. So I think that there's lots of opportunity here with proof of reserves to say that because these assets are digital, they're cryptographic. Here's what we can do. That this is something that should be carried over into the fiat world as well, in order to augment the assurances we have on traditional audits. So I do think that there's lots of education that needs to happen in this area, and so there's lots of challenges in that regard because new things are hard to learn,
Yes.
but also that we have to be careful about how to deliver these products to the public, because ultimately we want to simultaneously reassure the public that their assets are being correctly accounted for, but also inform them about the limitations of techniques, whether it's proof of reserves or any kind of audit techniques. In the wake of Enron, but all other accounting standards as well, there's a constant conversation among policymakers and accountants about what's called the expectations gap, which is what does the public think audits do versus what do they actually do?
Yes.
And that there's often a gap there where the public thinks that auditors are performing a forensic fraud examination of the entire company, when in reality they are providing probabilistic assurances that they have sampled a population of transactions, and based on their sample that they didn't find anything too many red flags or things like that. So
Right.
there's lots of things to unpack there, but I'm glad that we're having the conversation about proof of reserves in policy circles.
Well, and it makes me think of what you shared about when you first encountered Lightning Network and you weren't so sure, but then as you went along and it developed, you could see, wow, there's a huge value case here. And I think what I'm hearing you say with the proof of reserves, there's tools here with the blockchain and the analysis that we can make more robust what we're already doing with an audit, but we can continue to develop that because there's nuance, right? Just because that you show a wallet that has coins in it, it doesn't show the liabilities of that company. So using and leveraging these tools to move forward so that we can have more and more transparency for consumers.
That's right. And ultimately, the messaging has to emphasize that there is no second best to holding your own coins on your own keys and running your own node. And so proof of reserves is really just it's a treatment for a symptom.
Yes.
The root cause is that you're using a trusted third party. And so that's where I think that in terms of what exchanges should prioritize on their product roadmap, having features, for example, integrations with hardware wallets, empowers their users to actually take control of their own keys. That I think is really beneficial in addition to proof of reserves.
Well, Pierre, I have no doubt that you are going to continue to be on the forefront of helping the network and the whole industry as a whole think about it and develop in that direction. Before I let you go, I do want to just ask about Riot and what y'all are working on right now and the latest. I know you changed your name. Anything you want to share about what's going on down there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we changed our name from Riot Blockchain to Riot Platforms, not because we've reduced our conviction on Bitcoin at all, quite the opposite. We really just see it as the fact that in order to be competitive in Bitcoin mining, vertical integration is a strategic direction that makes a lot of sense for the company, and to build a Bitcoin mining platform that includes really a whole range of businesses. The first I would point out is real estate. So we have a site in Rockdale, we have a site in Corsicana, and as in any other real estate market, when it comes to Bitcoin mining, location matters. And so we're strategically positioned on the Texas ERCOT grid in order to create the most value for the communities, for the shareholders, and for the grid as well, of providing that stabilizing force on the grid. Two is that on top of being a real estate company, we're a construction company. So we build our own facilities. 3, that we're a electrical equipment manufacturing and designing company. We acquired ESS Metron. They're based out of Denver, Colorado. They're providing the equipment that we need to be able to scale up our mining operations. And then 4, we're a Bitcoin miner. So we have tens of thousands of Bitcoin mining rigs that are operating to secure the Bitcoin network, generate Bitcoin, and of course, to help stabilize the grid when we engage in curtailment. And last but not least, we are essentially a power company, right? That we purchase bulk amounts of electricity, and then we're able to use that electricity to respond to events on the grid, to be able to power down our miners, sell electricity back to the grid, and then power back up and sell electricity to the Bitcoin network. So that's really why we changed our name to Platforms, is to reflect the fact that the business has a lot of different components to it, and that we think this is the strategic direction to go in terms of being the lowest cost producer of Bitcoin and surviving the ups and downs of the Bitcoin market.
Well, we're really grateful to have you in Texas. I know we were down there recently and brought some lawmakers there and other people that were interested, and just really exciting what's going on down there. So I want to just thank you again for taking the time with me today, Pierre, and thank you to Riot and all that you're doing down there, and look forward to having you back again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me on, Christine.
You have a great day.
You too.
Hey y'all, Lee Bratcher here with the Texas Blockchain Council. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. It really does help other people find us. If you like this content, check out the Texas Blockchain Council YouTube channel, as well as following us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter.